Yeah, so I'll give the reduction to B theory or eternalism, as you call it, right? So first,
give a reduction. Wait. Give a reduction on eternalism, not G theory.
I said B theory. No. Why? You see those are distinct?
Yeah, they're distinct.
Sure. So first of all, axioms, position. Yeah. Do you grant the proposition that is the case that time exists?
Yeah.
Okay, time exists. Does all moments of time exist simultaneously?
Simultaneously, I could clarify on that one.
Simultaneously or spontaneously just means to happen at the same time. Not entering into distinct state of affairs. It's not changing. It's exact same time, same moment.
Yeah, simultaneously. Yeah, you can agree with that. What's the secret? Can you like look at my too loud, bro?
Bro, one sec. Does all moments of time exist simultaneously? Okay. I spelled that really wrong. Axiom. Right. So axiom said yes. Okay, you agree that simultaneously just means to happen at the same exact moment, correct? Exist at the same moment?
No, we clarify that one.
I bet.
Yeah, can you hear up? Yeah, okay, so we're talking about simultaneously at all points in time existing, like past, present, and future. I'm saying that the past is what we define as the past is something, an event that occurred beforehand, or an event that occurred just before, right? The present is what we define as an event that occurred currently, right, at the current moment. And the future is an event that occurred that is about to happen, okay? So we're talking about simultaneously when we're talking about an ontological value, where we're to say that if you were to wave your hand, you're like saying that, oh, in this current time, present, past, and future, at that current moment mixed up together to say that it simultaneously exists at the current moment, which is false, because when we're talking about past, present, and future, they're completely different. They're distinct. The past is what happens beforehand, present is what happens in the current moment, and the future is what happens in afterwards, right? Like what I'm saying here is that past follows present, present follows future. If they say the past and the future doesn't exist, which you argue presentism, right? When you're negating the existence, or you're saying that the absence of existence, or when you're talking about past and future, you'd be having contradictory propositions. I would say that because the events that is occurring, right, is still reliant. Because if we're to say today, today is the present, right? Well, tomorrow it's gonna be the future. And what happens today can be yesterday beforehand, which would be the past. So the flow of time for past, present, and future, I think they exist simultaneously, but not in a way in a sense that they both exist at the current moment. That'd be contradictory. We're talking about current moment, just mixing the three together.
Alright, bet. Alright, so let me just clarify something real quick. So, do you grant the proposition that it's the case that time is finite, exists finitely?
Yeah, you're saying, temporal infinitism and negating that?
Yeah, are you rejecting temporal infinitism? Do you reject temporal infinitism?
Yeah, sure.
Axiom rejects temporal infinitism. Right, so you're just saying that time is basically finite. Okay, should I pause the reductio now? Should I pause the reductio?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, do you think time is the grounding? Okay, hold on, let me just elucidate a principle real quick, right? If there is time, there is change, and biconditionally, so this is a biconditionalized principle, right? Biconditionally, if there is change, there is time. Right, so do you agree to this principle, right? It's a biconditionalized principle, do you agree to it?
Yeah.
If there's time, there's change. Biconditionally, if there's change, there's time. Right. To say that, to reject temporal infinitism or grant the proposition that it's the case that time is finite, we can posit reductio, right? Because all that would be saying is that there is a point where time did not exist to a point it did exist, right? So there's change, right? So time went from not existing to time went then from existing, right? So that's going to obviously be a contradiction because I already invoked time, you already agree to the biconditionalized principle. If there is time, there is change. If there is change, there is time, right? So if you agree to this principle and you agree that time exists, and then you say that, hello? If you agree to the biconditionalized principle that if there is time, there is change, biconditionally there is change, and there is time, then you say that you don't reject temporal infinitism, then you're just saying that there is a time where time did not exist, which is obviously going to be a contradiction because there's a change, right? So time being finite means it did not always exist, right? There's a change, right? So it went from not existing to existing. It went from to change is we're gonna define it real quick. So hold on, let me just do this. Change is entering distinct state of affairs. Entering distinct state of affairs, right? So time went into it non-existential state of affair to entering an existential state of affair, right? But that already implies some change. That already invokes some type of change. If you're invoking change, then give it a prior biconditionalized principle that does all moments of time exist simultaneously, and then you said yes, right? Later on, then you said if there is time, there is change. Biconditionally, there is change, there is time. You use this biconditionalized principle. Then we can derive the conclusion that's going to be the case that there was time prior to time. Oh my lord, prior to time, right? That's obviously going to be a contradiction because you say that there's no time, even though there is time at the same time, right? So it's basically a P and not P. So it's obviously going to be the case that time cannot be hold on, let me just type this out. P and not P. It's obviously the case that time cannot be finite. It's obviously the case that time cannot be finite. I cannot exist simultaneously. Either you have to deny that time is going to be finite, or you have to deny that time exists.
Alright, so you done?
Yep. Just 1 second.
Man,
I'm gonna tell my little brother to shut up because like he's telling me to do something and that's making me stutter a lot and that's distracting me a lot. So I'm gonna be able to listen if he keeps doing this. So just 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Watch.
So like, yeah, just mute up real quick. Okay.
Stop.
Yeah. Also, like to clarify before, like, you know, we started discussion. We're talking about biconditionally when we're talking about change and temporality. Well, we can really just put some distinctions that we're talking about change in relation to a temporal framework, right? But we can also be talking about change in an atemporal framework. When we're talking about the whole conception of change, you can specifically say that, okay, well, time is the flow of change, right? Like, and change under this framework would need time, right? Under this specific framework. An atemporal position and then a temporal position are completely distinct, so they're not really in the same similar framework, right? When we're talking about 0 and 1. So 0, obviously atemporal position, let's put this way, and 1, temporal position, right? Change requires temporal position under the 1 framework. We're talking about the 0 framework, they're distinct. Yeah. Not say in a sense they're basically distinct from 0 and 1, they're completely different. We're talking about conceptualizing two specific categories, right? So I would like to clarify that. I'm sure you're listening to this. I'm just like stating this as well.
I'm listening.
Until you can let me clarify. Right, I'm not continuing with my point.
You gonna continue?
Yeah, I'm not.
I bet. Continue. Hold on. I'm gonna go back on mute real quick.
Yeah. So we're talking about two distinct, right? Then let's go upon. I will say something to. I have two things to say for that reduction you gave. Obviously, with the first one, I like to say that the frameworks when we're talking about causation or change are they're completely distinct, and I would like to say when we're talking about biconditionally, right? I'm talking about a specific conception that we're talking about the categories of change under a temporal law, right? Under a temporal framework. That's gonna be the first one, right? The second one we say that temporal, where all points of time exist. Right? When say right of the current moment, right? When there is time, right? All points of time that is specifically existential. We're talking about like where if we say that it's potential infinity or that it's finite, right? There's a point in time where it didn't exist, right? But it did exist at that moment. We're talking about atemporal causation under that. So it's either the case that if you agree with atemporal causation, right? I'm gonna just give out the argument. Well, like when they say such as things such as singularity, where there's an infinite density, right? An infinite hot point in space. Well, let's not say space, but that's completely the expansion of the Big Bang, right? Like an infinite dense point, right? Infinite density, and then afterwards, like an expansion of the Big Bang, and then creates the universe. So spatial temporal expansion. If there's going to be atemporal and aspatial, where the infinite density and dense point then expands spatial and temporality, then you can argue atemporal causation if you're affirming potential infinite. But we're not talking about temporal infinitism since you deny that, right? I'm not assuming you do because you're arguing on my point, granting the fact that I hold to believe the potential infinity. Yeah. So granting that, right? Like the second point, like that. So atemporal causation and it's not really in relation to the current moment, right? When we're talking about the universe having all points of time, right? Past, present, and future. Past follows the present follows the future. At that specific moment, right, all of these three things can exist simultaneously. When we're talking about before it existed, that should not have any correlation to the current existing of the universe. Say, for example, that we have three specific frameworks or three specific categories that we're talking about, right? Where the creation of these three frameworks, where you say that the existential state of these are currently occurring, but the existential state before its existence, right, up to the absence of existence, however, the beginning of the existence doesn't correlate to the claim. So all points of time with past, present, and future, that's currently in relation to the universe that currently points out or like currently conceives of time. So that's gonna be the second point I have. The third point, yeah, wait, I'm not done.
I thought you said you had 2 points. My bad.
Sorry, my bad. Yeah, sorry for that one. 3 point, let's say 3 point is not really a 3 point, but more like an extra note, okay? Extra note. For extra notes, presentism only postulate the present exists. I'm sure you're defending this. I actually asked you beforehand before you left PC. I'm sure you're defending presentism, right? If you're gonna argue that past, future don't exist, the current moment, which is present, is the only point of time exists, right? Goes from the fact that the past doesn't no longer exist. That's gonna be false, because like for example, the events that occur in 2016. Existential at that moment no longer exists currently, but still the fact is existential, and it's the following of the past, still following from present, still implies that the past simultaneously corresponds to the present, and the same way as the present simultaneously corresponds to the future. For example, today is the present, yesterday is the past, or tomorrow is future. So the events that occurred on the past is existential. You can postulate that the current moment, for example, you and I are debating right now, going tomorrow, these events still occurred, right? Tomorrow, past already existed yesterday. Yeah, so it's already implying that it past exists. If next tomorrow, which is the future, right? It implies that if future and past doesn't exist, only the present does. You're saying that the occurrence from beforehand never existed, or the occurrence that's following up to present doesn't exist, and the present following up to the occurrence from future no longer exists as well. So that's just gonna be my reduction, and yeah, I'm gonna mute up. You can go ahead and continue your point.
Yeah, so let me just elucidate or extrapolate the category area that you made, right? So the category area, first of all, we have to first establish what you said. You said that the framework of change and causation can be relative to atemporality. Specifically, there's a category area here, right? You're trying to utilize causation, atemporal causation, to actually refute my argument or refute my reductio against your position, right? There's a problem with this, right? Because causation and change are distinct. and change are distinct, right? You're conflating the two, right? You're trying to utilize it to justify that my argument or conclusion is going to be false, that your position is false, which is what my conclusion was, right? You're trying to justify that my conclusion is false based on this, right? But I'm telling you that causation and change are distinct, right? So you are conflating the two by trying to say that, oh, the causation here is going to be atemporal. This has nothing to do with atemporal causality. This is talking about change, right? Change is inherently, right? Change is inherently temporal.
Your mic is cutting out.
It's cutting out?
Yeah.
It's cutting out?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's not.
Wait, hold on. Is it cutting out now? Is it cutting out now?
Not anymore.
Right. So listen, I think I have to repeat everything I said, right? You basically said that the framework of change and causation can be relative to atemporality, right? Later on you try to use atemporal causation to justify that my conclusion is false. What I'm specifically telling you here is that causation and change are distinct. So you're conflating two concepts, right? So in terms of the conceptual scheme, you would be saying that causation and change would be identical, right? That would be the implication of a conceptual scheme, right? So in terms of the conceptual scheme, causation and change must be identical. Otherwise, if they're not identical, then you conflate the two and then you're inherently, right, going to be making or committing a category error. So first, let me just like pause the disjunction here. So either causation and change are identical under, what the fuck is this spelled? Identical under your scheme. I spelled causation wrong as well, but I'm not bothered. Bro, what? I'm not used to typing on PC, man. Hold on. Either causation and change are identical under your scheme, or they are distinct, right? So let me just ask you the question: do you agree on the proposition that it's the case that causation and change are distinct under your conceptual scheme?
I would say that they're kind of synonymous, and you can kind of point out that change can be reducible to when we're talking about atemporality for temporality, such as like non-existence from existence.
Right. So you would be saying that causation and change are going to be interchangeable under the conceptual scheme, right? They're interchangeable.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be true, right? So I can just basically pause the reduction to that as well. So first of all, my definition of change is going to be entering distinct state of affairs. Entering distinct state of affairs, right? So change is going to be entering distinct state of affairs, right? If you're going to say that causation and change are going to be identical, right, then there's going to be a problem, because causation is just basically to bring something into existence, right? Or explain another thing. We have like explanatory causal power, right? So you have explanatory causal power, and you also have cause in relation to bringing an object X into existence, right? So basically, you have these two types of causations, right? If causation and change are going to be identical, right, there's going to be a problem, right? Because first of all, change is going to be entering into distinct state of affairs, right? And causation is just to bring something into existence, right? So if those things are identical, then you would be saying that, for example, the explanatory relationship, that the explanatory relation, bro, why not explanatory relationship, that X caused Y. Okay, so the explanatory relationship that X caused Y, meaning that at time 2, at time 1, right? So the explanatory causal relationship of that X caused Y at time 1 just means that X caused or brought Y into existence. So X brought Y into existence at time 1, right? If it's the case that that this is identical to change, then what is this, right? What would this be? Y, X went from causing Y to not causing Y, right? So X went from causing Y to not causing Y. Actually, let's reverse this real quick. X went from not causing Y, then it went from to causing. X went from not causing Y to bro, so hard to type on PC. Causing Y. X went from causing Y to not causing Y to causing Y, right? So the problem here is, if this isn't a change, then you'd just be saying that X going from causing Y to not causing Y would just be basically a causal relationship, right? You would be saying that X going from not causing to causing something is going to be a causal relationship. If that's the case, then that means that X caused itself to cause Y. X caused itself to cause Y, right? If that's the case, right? So if, in terms of your conceptual scheme, causation and change are going to be identical, right? So the explanatory relationship that X caused Y at time 1, right? It would basically be saying that X went from not causing Y to causing Y, right? That's going to be the relationship that's going to be invoked. So that would just be saying that X caused itself to cause Y under your internal conceptual scheme. Okay? So now that's established, then you can literally reapply this an infinite amount of times, right? Because then X caused itself to cause Y, then X caused itself to cause Y are all going to be applicable, because it changes from not causing itself to not cause Y to causing itself to cause Y, right? So there's going to be infinite regress, right? So that's just the category error I'm going to extrapolate, right? I'm giving a reductio to you saying that causes and change are identical, right? It's still category error under my view because causation and change are distinct. So yeah, actually, you can reply.
Okay. So, wait, give it up. Yeah, okay, my bad. So, I have two things to say, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about causation and change. Well, change is inherently, when I said like, it kind of connects with causation, I'm not saying that they are identical in the sense when we're talking about causation equals change, as in causation is like equivalent in its sense of an ontological value or in sense of its properties when it comes to change. I would say that's completely not the case, but they're kind of correlated in a sense. When we're talking about, for example, me causing the apple to fall off the ground, the change on the apple from standing from, or like sitting at A, right, and then going from B, right, but, right, the causation of me throwing an apple to the B is not correlated because we're talking about change, but they can be correlated, right, they can be connected. They're not going to be the same, they're not going to be in the sense that it's identical when it comes to actions, right, because obviously change, it will require something for it to have a change. I think that when we're talking about, like, temporal functions, right? Like, if I were to say that if I were to charge my fucking phone with a charger, I need to plug in the fucking charger inside the fucking, how do I say this? Like, you have to plug it in. Let me just say it like that, right? You have to plug it in.
Yeah, my bad, don't even connect. My bad, don't but I wanna just impose the axiom critique. Oh, I'm on my bad, internal critique.
Yeah, I'll get to your critique in the second part. I'm in the first mistake.
Can I just say it now because I feel like my brother's gonna like interrupt me a lot.
No. Wait. Let me just finish.
Oh man, my brother's gonna interrupt me, bro.
Right. So when we're talking about like connections, like when we're talking about causality and change, they're not really in the sense identical. We're talking about expressions, so I'm talking about that. So the change requires an action, and let's say the causality will be the action under the temporal function, right? We're not really talking about atemporal causation yet. So if they were to do that thing, right, they're not going to be the sense that they are completely identical, but they're going to be the sense that they are relational in a sense. Yeah. So that's going to be my first critique on that one when you're talking about like causation and causality.
The hell? Hello?
But X went from not causing Y to causing Y, and then went from not causing Y to causing Y. So that's going to be, yeah, you're arguing from an infinite regress under this one. Yeah, I can hear you. Wait, can you hear me or not? Wait, you can't hear me? Well, okay, I'm pretty sure you can now, so I'm just gonna get on my argument. So in simple terms, you're saying it's an infinite regress because you're asserting the not causations from this to this. Well, not in a sense because we don't really have any ways to conceive of this, right? We're just saying actions that we don't have any knowledge of. We don't talk about posterior knowledge. Right? So like we're saying that the action, and it's we're talking about atemporal causation. You can say that atemporal causation, right? You can say the causation is going to be limited to time. Like temporality is going to be defined as cause and change, cause and effect, right? You can say that's going to be related to time. When we're talking about atemporal causation, you can say it's lacking of that. But when we're talking about atemporal causation as a whole, we're talking about philosophical view or a physical point in time, right? In a sense where we're just unexplained, but to the point where going from X to Y, not X going to Y in a sense, or not X going to X, right? Not X from existential to X, negative X going to positive X, right? The sense that you're gonna say it's gonna lead to an infinite regress, you're gonna say positive X going from negative X, and negative X going from positive X. Not really. I'm just gonna say that since if both are incompatible, but that's the thing, we don't really have any conceivability to put any knowledge to it. So the conceptual schema doesn't really correlate to that at all. We don't have any input on that, like actual input to actualities to this occurrence or these events. What I'm just gonna say is if we deny temporal infinitism, the only point we have really is atemporal causation. Right? I'm pretty sure that you already argued, right, that if you don't really believe in temporal infinitism, right, you're gonna argue on potential infinity or finite infinity, or I said finite infinity, finite in sense of time, right? So it doesn't seem as if you have any rebuttal that you just kind of asked me the question, you give out the argument how it's kind of contradict when we're talking about past and future. You're already like affirming presentism. You're gonna say that past and the future do not exist as a whole. But if you're gonna say posit that only the present exists, you're gonna say that time specifically exists under the temporal framework, under the universal framework. Distinct from we're talking about metaphysical framework, that is, opposite from the universe. And we're gonna talk about atemporal causation under that. So what I really want to get here is that this shouldn't really be a reduction to the point. I didn't even get a reduction to the second point when I was talking about the floors of time, like when past, present, and future. I don't think I even get there. We even get to that point. So if you didn't really have any rebuttals to this, I guess we can let that slide. So we're gonna go upon the arguments on whether or not the temporal infinitism or negation to temporal infinitism, right? So to the point, I'm just gonna make this clear. I'm gonna reiterate again, but I'm gonna also clarify further. So saying that not X going from X, non-existent going from existent, right? Wait, hold on. You say something, so you're changing from not causing X to causing X is a cause. No, not really, because like that's the thing, we're actually like corresponding to the category here, because we're talking about not cause, right? By atemporal causation is when we're saying that there's a causation between atemporality and temporality. But you're gonna say it's contradictory because temporality relates to causation, so we're gonna define it. But the entire concept of atemporal causation is when we're gonna debate either if it exists or not. But atemporal causation just states that non-existent, right? Like there's no temporality with it, but you're gonna say, oh, change is within temporality, and you're saying this biconditional. But I already said that under a category that atemporal framework and temporal framework, they can be distinguished, right? When I'm saying that the complete conception of causation under a temporal framework, you're gonna say that they're biconditional. But under a causation that's disregarding or just completely distinct from temporal functions, such as the atemporal function, then it's gonna be the case that that atemporal framework is a completely distinct, right? If we can completely distinct, we can conceptualize it, right? We can conceptualize it. So the intent for atemporal causation of not causing X is gonna say causing X, right? We're going to say not X causing from X, right? I don't think there's gonna be an fucking infinite regress from that point. There's gonna be no infinite regression from that point, because we're gonna take causation under a 0 point of framework. Let's say 0 is atemporal and 1 is temporal, right? Causation, for given specific frameworks, you can call it that. Under the 0 framework, right? Not X, 0 causation. Like we're going about in a 0 framework, we're talking about causation as well. Not X causation to fucking X, positive X, right? Negative X from positive X. So in a sense, we're not really gonna say that it's a not cause. It is a cause, right? It's not gonna say it's a contradictory or reductio to it, because we're saying not cause, then to cause, then not cause, then to cause, right? Because like they're gonna be completely distinct. We're talking about causation under an atemporal framework, and you're gonna question me, how is that possible? Well, I don't have the conceivability to have that knowledge, right? I don't have the conceptual schema for that. I'm pretty sure both of us don't either. It's like you don't even know how atemporal causation even functions in actuality. You're just gonna say, because it lacks temporality, there's causation. But we're talking about finite time, right? Or potential infinity. There has to be a point in time where the universe exists. It's not going to be infinite, right? So if that is to be the case, the only option we really need to progress upon is atemporal causation. We're going to say God's relational to atemporal causation under that specifications here. So under atemporal causation, if it were to be the case under the singularity point I give out, where there's an infinite dense point within nothingness, the infinite hot point in that specific thing, and then the expansion and causal relations between the Big Bang theory. When it explains the expansion of the Big Bang, the expansion of spatial temporality, right? So if we're going to argue that is existential, right, there's the only point when it comes to eternalism that should not be relational to the start of it. So if where all points in time simultaneously exist is where we're talking about the universal quantification under the current moment, not under the specific semantics under the start of the universe. So that's going to be completely distinct. It won't actually even affect my position whatsoever. Yeah, that's gonna be my full argument, and then you can go ahead and give your argument.
Right. So let me just establish something real quick. So let's just read this message that I sent. At time 1, you do not cause the apple to fall on the ground. At time 2, you cause the apple to fall on the ground. So this is a change, right? Because you enter into distinct state of affairs. So on the conceptual scheme, internal conceptual scheme, right? You have bro, stop. Internal conceptual scheme, right? It's gonna be the case that you have change, right? Because change is just to enter distinct state of affairs. At time 1, you were entering a state of affair P, and then at time 2, you're entering a state of affair Q, for example, right? So let's just I'm right here. Change equals cause on the semantic conceptual scheme, right? So you changing from not causing X to causing X is a cause within itself. So we can reapply infinitely, right? Then you said that no, they're not absolutely identical, meaning that under some Leibnizian principle of indiscernibles, they're not going to be identical. Leibnizian principle of I'm spelling all this shit wrong. Indiscernible. Yeah, I'm never spelling that shit again. So Leibniz's principle of indiscernible says that if X and Y have all the same properties, then X and Y are extensionally identical. Identical. So right, under Leibniz's principle of indiscernibles, if X and Y have all the same properties, then the case that X and Y can be extensionally identical, right? You deny that they are absolutely identical, meaning that they have some distinct property, okay? So then it would be the case that we go back to the disjunction here, right? The disjunction was either causation and change are identical in the conceptual scheme, or they are distinct, right? You denied the first disjunction that it's going to be that they are identical. You denied the first disjunct, right? You said that they're not identical, they're not absolutely identical under the Leibnizian principle of indiscernibles, meaning that they have to be distinct. If they are distinct, then given my justification for it would be the case that if it's true that they are distinct, then you have made a category error, then it's just the case that you basically agreed that you made a category error, right? Because I already extrapolated or justified why it's going to be the case that it would be a category error if it's the case that they are distinct. You deny the disjunction, or disjunct, not disjunction, you deny the disjunct that they are identical in the conceptual scheme, meaning that they have to be distinct, right? That's the only possible interpretation. And you can also justify this via the law of exclude the middle, so either P or not P, right? So either P is true or not P is true, right? Given the definition, if you the definitions, right, you have identical and distinct. Identical and distinct is, so you have identical and then you have distinct. Distinct just means to not be identical, right? So either something is identical or not identical. That's going to be true in virtue of the law of exclude the middle. I'm pretty sure we were already presupposing the laws of logic when we were debating, right? So it's going to be the case that you have committed a category error, right? I already gave you justification for this. You affirmed the second part of the disjunction, right? Hold on. Alright, now I find the message right here, okay? Let me just find the message. Okay, there it is. If there is time, there is change. Biconditionally, if there is change, there is time, right? You try to argue that there can be change relative to temporality. It cannot be the case that change can be relative to temporality. Why? Because when I say that if there is time, there is change, right? You go to the proposition that is the case, then it would just mean that there can't be atemporal change, because then that would be contradicting the fact that there would be time, right? So listen, we agreed that to the biconditionalized principle, if there is time, there is change. Biconditionally, if there is change, there is time, right? So that means change is exclusive or can only be pertained to time. You can't have atemporal causality, right? So let me just even expand even more. I can even give a further reduction, right? Am I lagging out because it said my internet was like 616 milliseconds per milliseconds? Am I lagging out? Hello, am I lagging out?
No, not really.
Okay. So you agree to the biconditionalized principle that if there is time, there is change. Biconditionally, there is change, there is time, right? Meaning that change cannot be relative to an atemporal framework. It cannot be atemporality, right? Change necessarily has to be temporal, right? So if you agree to that, then you just contradicted your paradoxal commitment. That's going to be the case that there can be change relative to atemporality, right? So that's going to be contradiction there. So I don't think the argument even applies, right? Just what, and also, if you agree that, actually, no, you know what? I'm gonna explain this critique after, not right now, so you can continue.
Okay, so I'm assuming you're done, so we'll just like give out some reductions, so like rebuttals and stuff. The first one is when we're talking about under the principle, or whatever this is, if x and y have all the same properties, and x and y are, hold on, just give me a moment, if my siblings are fucking annoying.
Same, bro, same. I literally can't debate you because of this, like, bro. My little brothers keep trying to tell me to help him on like some brain rot game, bro.
I know, right?
Bro, he's telling me to help. Bro, he's literally tapping my shoulder saying, help me on this brain rot game. It literally made me stutter so many times, bro. He's ruining my rhetorical aura, bro. Like, bro, I'm not gonna help you on your brain rot game. Just let me debate.
Alright, let me continue now. So, under this principle in discernibles, right? So if x and y have all the same properties, and x and y are essentially identical. But when I'm talking about identical here, like, is that A is identical to A? Are you simply saying that A is, equivalent to A? Like, for example, if I say that I'm identical to myself, right? That me is identical to me. When we're talking about change, right? I'm talking about, in a sense, we're talking about the conception of identical. I'm saying in that sense, right? When we're talking about change and causation, I wouldn't really say that they are identical in that specific sense that we're talking about, right?
Right, so wait, so let me just clarify this for just to get clarity. The Leibniz principle of indiscernibles would say that if x and y have all the same properties, then x and y are identical, or extensionally identical, right? You're denying that they are extensionally identical, right? You're saying that but that change and causation are going to be extensionally distinct, correct? Hello? You'd be saying these are distinct, right? Oh shit. Hello? Yeah, hello now? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So under Leibniz's principle of indiscernibles, if x and y all have the same properties, then x and y are going to be extensionally identical. You're denying that causation and change are going to be identical, right? You're denying that. You're saying that they're distinct, correct?
Okay. Can I talk about?
Bro, it's just a yes or no. It's just a yes or no. I'm just trying to get clarity. Just be really fast. Don't say anything. It's a yes or no. Is cause and change the same thing under this principle that I gave?
With all properties being relational?
No, all properties being the same.
Being the same properties. Can I clarify? Can you like it up?
Yeah, can you just say, it's just a yes or no, please, just yes or no.
Well, okay, it could be depicted as either yes or no, because it really depends on how your question portrays my answer, right? So, say for example, if I were to say yes, they have the same properties, such as if you were to change, right? Like for example, you throw the apple on the ground, right? There's a change to that. But the causation of you throwing the apple has no relation to the change starting throwing the apple. So in a sense, they have the same similar properties, right? Causation has relation to change. Change doesn't start off the occurrence, which causality does. In a sense, I guess you can say extensionally identical. But when I'm talking about identicality, I'm saying that they're not really the same. In a sense, in the full-on when I describe identicality,
that's a contradiction. That's a contradiction. Because to be extensionally...
Check. Okay. Let me clarify, let me clarify. For example, right, when I'm saying identicality, because me is equal to me, or A is equal to A. If you say A and B have similar properties, when you say extensionally identical, sure, I can agree with that. But we're talking about A equals A as an identical, where A is A, right? A isn't B, but A and B have same properties, in a sense, not in a complete way, but they hold similar relational properties, right? So that's just my point, and you can continue.
Yeah, just 1 second. So let me just search something up because I cannot spell this on PC. This is way too hard. Have not been on my laptop for a long time, so let me just right. Extension identical equals absolutely identical to Leibniz's principle of indiscernibles, right? So those things are going to be identical things, right? So extension identical, absolutely identical, they're just the same thing, right? The same concept, right? So you say that they are extension identical, but absolutely identical is just going to be a contradiction. You're just saying that A is not A, which violates. Let me type it down. Which violates the law of identity. Right, so you just contradict classical logic, right? So that's one. Also, Yeah. Hello. Okay. Later on, you said that they're not they don't have all the same properties in a complete sense. That's not the Leibnizian principle of indiscernibles. The Leibnizian principle of indiscernibles is saying that x and y have all the same properties, meaning that for all properties x has and all properties y has, there's no difference in their properties, right? Not that.
No.
Okay, so they're not extensionally identical. Okay, if they're not extensionally identical, then give the message here at time 1, you did not cause the apple to fall on the ground. At time 2, you caused the apple to fall on the ground. So this is the change. If change is identical to cause under a semantic conceptual scheme, so you will say that change from causing x to not causing x to cause within itself. So we can reply this infinitely, and then infinite fallacy can be applied to your argument, right? But you say that they are not identical, so I can't apply this argument. Okay, but then there's a problem, right? Now we have a dilemma. Either causation and change are identical in the conceptual scheme, or they're not distinct. Or they are distinct, right? So if you say that they are distinct, which you just affirmed right now, you said that they're not extensionally identical, then it's going to indicate that you literally committed a category error, right? Because now you conflate the two, right? Even though they are distinct things, right? So that's going to be a category error. I only gave it a distinction going to indicate that if you deny that they are identical, then it's going to indicate that it's going to be category error, right? I'll explain this multiple times prior, right? So it just seems to be the case that this is a category error. And now let's look at this. You're saying that. Hold on, let me just find the message real quick.
May I get a full rebuttal?
Yeah, let me do my rebuttal real quick. I just need to find the message so I can like apply a reductio. Alright, so if you're saying that they're identical, right? If you're saying that cause and change are identical, then that would be, you can apply the infinite regress fallacy, right? Where you can just say that if there is a single change, right? If you, for example, if x caused y to not causing y, that in itself would be a cause internalized to conceptual scheme. Internalized to your conceptual scheme, right? On the condition that you're going to say that causation and change are identical. If there's an infinite amount of causation, then you say that there's an infinite amount of change. Given the biconditionalized principle that you granted prior, right? Then you would be saying that there's an infinite amount of time, which would be contradicting your paradox that commitment. That's the case that temporal infinitism is false. You'd reject temporal infinitism. But here you're saying that if there is time, there is change by condition, there is change, there is time, and then I give justification for it's going to be the case that if you say that these two things are going to be identical, then under your conceptual scheme or internalized conceptual scheme, then it would be the case that you'd be agreeing that there's an infinite amount of change. If there's an infinite amount of change, then you say there's an infinite amount of time, given the biconditionalized principle that I gave prior, right? So you would be contradicting your paradox and commitment. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. You can just continue with the rebuttal now. But listen, I'm not even sure what you're affirming right now, because at one time you're saying that they're identical, at one time you're saying that they are extensionally identical, and then another time you're saying that they're absolutely identical, and I don't even know what's going on. So either they are identical or they are distinct. Which one's it gonna be?
Alright, so when bound down, we're talking about all the same properties. It kind of mistook that as in the sense that they have similar properties, right? So if you're saying all properties in the sense that they have all the same properties, I would just kind of deny that, because like I've said again, the causation is the cause of the action. The change is what follows up from that action, right? So if you were to say that causation and causality were to be identical, you say causation and change would be to be identical, right? After moving by itself is so you'll be saying that it's changing from falling to the ground. You're saying that's relational because it's causation, that change caused that, which not really be the case. You need causation for that. In a sense, I'm saying that they're related. But we're talking about, for example,
so they entail each other, right? So they entail each other, right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. If they entail each other, right? If x entails y, then x is distinct from y inherently. That's inherently the case. So you say that they're distinct. Okay, so they're distinct.
Can I really like a full rebuttal? Like if you want to interrupt, you can go ahead and interrupt after. I know, let's not say interrupt. You can go and give all of your rebuttals after I posit mine. Okay, I think that's pretty fair, right? Because like sometimes like stop me and stuff. So what I'm just gonna clarify is if x entails x, then x is distinct from y. Yeah, I would say in a sense they're not in the sense that they kind of like correspond to some sort of properties. They can have similar properties. Because we're talking about causation, right? You're applying change when you're causing something. The cause of the action of doing so relates on change, but the change is not causing the action. The change is what follows up after the action. Okay, that's the point. So in a sense that they kind of entail each other. They kind of correlate. They kind of connect. Not in the sense that they're identical in that when you're talking about extensionally identical, when they have all the same properties. But the thing here is they don't have the same properties as the given criteria I gave out and the given properties that they correspond to, that they showcases, right? Under that specific thing, it would be extensionally identical. However, if you say it's somewhat that they correspond, then yeah, sure, right? But back to the point, right? Let me just like give out 3 arguments, right? Because specifically you brought up 2, and the 3 was unresponsive from that specific point. So, the first point you had was that infinite regress, right? That's the first point. X went from not causing y to causing y to not causing y to causing y. You're saying that if there's an infinite causation, you're going to relate that infinite causation to infinite change. That would be infinite change, right? But that's the thing. I already denied it having infinite. Because like we're talking about atemporal causation from the specific framework of causation 0 to 1, right? From causation, we're talking about zero causation in a sense that under the atemporal framework, right? The one causation is under the temporal framework or under the temporal function, right? I'm talking in a sense that if x causes y, right? In a sense, not x. Right? Let me just disregard y to say that not x or negative x causes positive x. Negative x went from positive x. Basically, atemporal functions under that, right? So I already denied infinite causation here, because like if you were to say that it not x caused x, I'm saying that there's no fucking relational, because like if you say not x to x is just not x to x. There's no such thing as when you're saying that not x going from x to not x going from x. There's not going to be an infinite regress under that point, so I already denied that, right? So under the conceptual schema, we don't really have any knowledge of atemporal causation, but under the fact they move to disregard temporal infinitism, this is the only option we got, right? This is the only option we got when we're talking about atemporal. This is the only option we got when we're talking about atemporal causation, or the beginning of time, right? When we talk about the singular point. So they also like give out an argument on like fucking that I said on the biconditional point where change equals time. I already actually clarified beforehand. I said that we're talking about change as a whole under the temporal function, then yes, the biconditional under the temporal function. I clarified this even at the start debate. So when we're talking about atemporal causation, you're distinguishing causation under specific levels of framework or under specific domains. Because obviously if you're gonna say that under a temporal function, yeah, of course, causality or change is affirmed by time under the temporal function. Under an atemporal function, that's going to be distinct, because they're not going to be similar causations, because obviously atemporal and temporal causations are not the same. So in a sense, when we're talking about the specific framework and its origins, yeah, they're not the same. Under the ontological value of that, when I'm saying the biconditional, that time and change are are fucking correlated, obviously I'm talking about the physical nomic temporal law, right? The temporal function. So that's going to be the second point. That's just a misunderstanding. I already clarified it. The third point, right? Wait, was it the third point? Let me just extend on for the second point on the first point. So we're talking about fucking, how do I say this? Like all the same properties, where if you were to say that atemporal causation caused the existence of the universe, right? You're saying that the infinite regress from negative x to positive x, etc., etc. So positive x going to negative x, or like how do I say this? Let me just go back to your messages real quick. So changing from not causing x to causing x is a cause within itself, then we can reapply infinitely. Not causing x to causing x is a cause, and then you're gonna say it's a not cause to the relational to it being a cause. And then you're going to say it's a cause under the argument that it's not a cause. But we actually already refuted this under the framework I gave out earlier. The framework specifically is that if we're talking about causation in a distinct way, you're saying that you cause a non-existent to an existential thing under an atemporal causation, right? If you hold the conceptions that atemporal causations exist or not. If you don't, then we can either argue on that or yes or no or whatever. But we're talking about singularity under the start of the universe. Obviously, we're talking about infinite space, right? Literally just expansion of the spatial temporality, where there was no specific space and time, right? If we're talking about causations here, it's not going to be relational to it being a not cause. Because if you're going to say it's a not cause, then you're negating causality under the specific scope from x to y or x to x or negative positive x, right? You're negating the specific causation when you're talking about not cause to cause, right? Like x, not cause to x, but cause x to existence, right? There's not cause, not cause. But we talk about atemporal causation, that would be a cause. There would be not cause. There will not be anything that are relational to a negation to cause. There will be no absence of cause in itself, because we're talking about the specific framework of functionality. When we're talking about causation that we have no conceivable knowledge of. So the conceptual schema, when we're talking about causation as a whole under an atemporal distinction, it's not going to be relational. So the biconditional you give out with the second point, which is relational to the first point you gave out, would be how I say not correlation and not relational, because like I said, I kind of denied the fact that if you're gonna say causation is limited under temporal framework, I said right under the specific framework it should be correlated. But under a specific whole conception of causality in two distinct frameworks, they will not be in a case of a biconditional, but in a biconditional on the temporal function. So if you deny the second part, the first part will follow up. Because if you follow up the first part, the causation will not have any relation to a not causation, right? So it would negate the infinite regress point. So two arguments presented. I don't think that it will be rebuttal to any of my points. Actually, it would just be like a more overcomplexity, oversimplified. Right? The third point, right? The third argument.
Bro, please, bro, this is so much. Listen, bro. This is a shotgun argumentation, bro. Let's just do this. Let's go point by let's go point by let's go point by point, right? So you said that we can separate change. Okay, you said we can separate change under two distinct categories. Bro, please don't give the full thing. Don't do the full thing, bro. It's a shotgun fallacy.
I'm not doing the full thing. My bad. My bad. Wait. Give me a moment. Right? The third argument isn't actually a thing that corresponds to the first and second argument, right? The third argument is actually pretty fucking easy to understand. It's actually gonna take me 10 seconds to explain it. So don't worry, right? Actually, even after this, I gotta go eat so we can conclude. You can give out your point, right? After that, we can conclude. But anyways, this gonna be the third argument is actually not that fucking. It's not really shotgunning, right? So the third argument, which I brought out, right, is that when we're talking about the current existing phenomenon, which is the universe, right? If we're disregarding the atemporal causation or the first beginnings of the universe, the debate is eternalism versus presentism. Eternalism postulates past, present, and future, right? So the universe, if past follows up from the present follows up from the future. If you don't have any rebuttals against this, it kind of disregards presentism. If you're going to go upon the first point, which is the atemporal causation, it would also deny presentism. Because if you were to say the only thing that exists is the present, if you're going to say all points of time exist, right? Contradictory. Oh, yeah, of course. We're talking about the atemporal causation. Yeah, that will be contradictory. So it will be even contradict presentism. Because, like I said, from your argument, going from presentism or to deny eternalism would really just like deny presentism as a whole. So that's going to be the third argument that I think you didn't give an argument against. And yeah, that's going to be all the short term.
Okay, so look, the third argument is just way too long. Like, there's too many like arguments, bro. Like, look, I sent you the shit in DMs, right? Shotgun argumentation, right? Using a large number of arguments so that the opponent is unable to answer them all, right? Has such bad sleep. Anyways, right, I'm just gonna respond to one of your points, okay? And after that, we're gonna conclude because there's way too many points, right? And I'm gonna make one more point, and that's all. So it's only 2 points, okay? We can separate change into distinct categories: temporal function of change and atemporal function of change. Well, that's contradictory, right? That's contradictory. So my principle here was just that biconditionalized principle. The biconditionalized principle states that if there is change, there is time. If there is time, there is change, and that's a biconditionalized relationship. That's a biconditionalized relationship, okay? So if that's the case, then there seems to be a contradiction within what you're saying, because I'm saying that if there's time, there is change, right? I'm not saying temporal change, I'm just saying change simpliciter, right? So it would govern both categories of temporal function of change and atemporal function of change, right? So it seems to be the case that the two categories you gave of change is actually contradictory to the fact that you granted the proposition that's going to be the case that the principle or the biconditionalized principle is true. You granted that the biconditionalized principle is true, right? You said, hold on, let me find the message. Okay, if there's time, there's change. Okay, this is change simpliciter, right? But then there's a problem, right? Change can be separated into two categories. One of the categories is temporal, right? So it's temporal, and then the other is atemporal, right? That's a problem now, because now you are literally simplicity. Yeah, my bad for my pronunciation. Anyways, change one of the categories is temporal, the other is atemporal. If one of them is atemporal, right, then we're talking about change simpliciter, right? Then you're saying that that is.
Yeah, come.
Oh my little brother, bro. Can you hear him? Can you hear my little brother? Did you hear me? Did you hear him speak?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, if you agree that there is time, there is change, simpliciter, then all that is saying is that there is time, there is temporal change and atemporal change. But that's impossible. How can there be atemporal change when there is time, right? Because time is obviously that which is external to atemporality, right? So how can it be parasitic to time, right? That's obviously going to be a contradiction, okay? So that's just going to be my point. Another thing. I'm not finished yet, right? Is that if you have atemporal change, that doesn't really make sense, right? Because if you have the same state of, yeah, I'm recording this. If you have the same state of affairs at one moment, right? If in the same moment you have state of affair X, that's not change because you're remaining the same. So under my internalized or under my conceptual scheme, it's going to be the case that change is entering two distinct state of affairs. But if it's one moment, you're not entering two distinct state of affairs. If it's one moment, right? Then if it's one moment and you have two distinct state of affairs, then you would be saying that there could be contradictions, right? Because then you would be saying that at time X, right? At time X, state of affair P is true of a subject Y, okay? State of affair P is true of a subject Y, and state of affair B is also true of the subject Y. Okay, type them both out, right? So if it's the case that change there is atemporal change, then there would be the case that it could be there's possibility of contradiction, which violates the law of non-contradiction, right? Because you can have state of affair P and B, which are two distinct state of affairs, be true simultaneously for one subject, right? So you can say, like, for example, axiom is in the state of affair of gooning to a state of affair of not gooning, okay? Both state of affairs can be true at the same time, but that's not a change, right? Because you're not entering into two distinct state of affairs, you already possess the same state of affairs simultaneously, and not just that, that's going to be a contradiction, because then you would be saying that at the same time, axiom is gooning and not gooning, so he's entering into, he has the same state of affairs, which are incompatible, and he has them simultaneously, which is going to violate the law of non-contradiction, because there's a contradictory state of affairs, right? So it just seems to be the case that this is just going to be a contradiction, right? And for conclusion parts, I'm not going to conclude, right? Well, I mean, we are going to conclude, but like, we're not going to give our like conclusions. We're just going to say that, you know, I think I won, you think you won, for example, right? And like, we're just gonna watch the recording and that's all, okay? Do you agree to that?
Wow, okay, to be fair, that was really, really fun.